If you're hanging out here, go ahead and take a seat. Make sure you have some water. This next presenter is going to be up here for about an hour and a half. Really amazing, amazing presentation. Looking back to economic futures, Christina is getting her master's in accounting, but doing it from a Hawaiian lens and framework. So come in, open heart, open mind, and thank you everyone for being here. And I'll hand it off to Christina. Sorry, I'll make an announcement shortly after, right before lunch. So stick around for more announcements. Thank you.
Mahalo.
After lunch.
Can everyone hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, mahalo nui. Aloha ʻāina kākou. Mahalo for giving me your most precious makana, your manawa today. You could be anywhere in the world, but you're here to discuss looking back to our economic futures. This is what I hope will be the inoa of my future dissertation. I want to bring my ohana into this space because I want to be a part of normalizing the discussion around historical, intergenerational, and personal trauma, because I believe that if we are to achieve an aloha ʻāina economy, we must deal with the collective grief and trauma of our lahui. And so I want to bring into the space my kūpuna Jack Kalevahea. He was born in Wailua, Oahu in the mid-1800s. He was a rancher. He was really adept on the ʻāina. In his adult life, however, he was falsely accused of having leprosy, and that's how we know so much about him, because a lot of his moʻolelo is documented in the New Kepa. And so we have accounts of him where he's flipping over filled with Haole police that are trying to pursue him for this leprosy to send him to Kalaupapa. They're shooting at him. We see the trauma, the fear that must have been experienced in this. He has a moʻolelo very similar to Piʻilani and Hoʻolau. He was hiding in the mountains. There's a letter that he wrote that was published in the New Kepa, where he's talking about the injustices that he's experiencing and how much he misses his ohana, his wahine, and including a newborn keiki. And so this was very informative for me for a number of reasons. For the Kalevahea ohana, we haven't been as ma'a with our moʻokūʻauhau for some generations now, but we have been reclaiming that. Also, this was informative for me because it was my realization of it was my identification of the point at which the historical trauma being experienced in the Hawaiian Kingdom, the encroachment of capitalism, the closure of the economies, now transfers into the Kalevahea ohana, becoming intergenerational trauma that we're still coping with today. So I also want to bring into this space my kūpuna kane, Calvin Hokulani Kalevahea in the bottom right ki'i. He was very abusive to my father and my father's 10 siblings growing up. Fortunately, he did have opportunities to transform when he got involved with the Second Native Hawaiian Renaissance. Skippy Iowane, he provided a eulogy at my kūpuna kane's hoʻolelo last year, and he was sharing about his moʻolelo, of how hard they were coming into the movement, how brutal they were, how toxic masculine they were. But the movement changed them and allowed them to embrace kapoloha. So that shows the power of getting connected with our ike. I also want to mention my kūpuna wahine, Rovi Yoshi Awa. She's a kealoha nui. The kealoha nui hail from Ke'anai on Maui. She also experienced a lot of abuse growing up with her Native Hawaiian father. And she'd always tell me about being in these girls' homes when she was in like her preteen years. And I didn't really think much of it. And I actually forgot about these girls' home stories until just last year when I was engaging with Dr. Maiʻa Arvin's work. She studies the history of these homes, and it's just another point at which the Haole were trying to institutionalize us and segregate our ohana and break us apart. My father is Troy Calvin Kalevahea in the blue shirt there. Like I said, a lot of severe abuse in his lifetime. He was incarcerated in his young adulthood. He has a felony on his record. Also, my mother in the bottom left corner, Jill Mercedes Lauterbach. She's Haole. Her mother married a kānaka in California, and then they moved the ohana over to Waimanalo, but also experienced a lot of abuse in her childhood. She was put out of the home at the age of 13 years old, never welcomed back. So she's been on her own since then. Her highest formal level of education was 8th grade. She's still the most intelligent person I know. So thank you for allowing me to share these me'e with you. Even though, I grew up as a keiki on the welfare system with my single mother, I somehow became a first generation college student. And I don't mean to praise college in any neoliberal way, but I do think it's important for Kanaka to go to the University of Hawaii in particular, because there are Kanaka who have created a space, a point of intervention through which we can recapture our Kanaka who have been lost to denationalization like me. I didn't know anything about Ike Hawaii growing up, but because of those educators in the university, I was recovered, and I'm deeply indebted to them. And I want to share again that I do my economic analysis for all in the lawfully, but I especially do it for those who are suffering the most from historical, intergenerational, and personal trauma. I want to take a moment to mahalo these people. There's too many to name who have allowed me to be where I'm at today. These are people who have loved me. These are people who don't know me, but whose work has influenced mine tremendously. These are people who have thrown their weight behind me. I want to mahalo Purple Maiʻa for being one of those people, putting your weight behind me, allowing me to be a part of this wonderful event. Congratulations on Eahou Fest, and thank you for opening up the conversation on Ōiwi economics. That said, no makakilo, ika apupu a ohonuriuli maiau, o Christina Kalevahea Pu'ui no a ʻāina kākou. Trigger warning, I'm about to flood you all with a lot of information. That's my style. I'm very pele, no chill, no cap. My friend Kanani said that for Kanaka, our love language is books. So yes, you're just gonna get all the books that I've been reading in a very short amount of time. So thank you for your patience with that. I also want to disclose that I don't have a doctorate. I'm not even a doctoral student. Like Leigh mentioned, I'm working on my Master of Accounting, my Master of Science and Finance. I work in the accounting field. All of these things to say I'm not qualified to be chatting with any of you today. So thank you for your patience with that. For fun, I like to analyze stocks, and you might be feeling some red flags at this point in the conversation and this slide, but I want you to know that I'm dedicated to anti-capitalism. And I always feel compelled to state that explicitly, because if I was on the outside looking in at me, I would think I'm an assimilated, federal recognition, Democratic Party, neoliberal Kanaka, but I want you to know that I don't want to waste your time with that. I'm adamantly opposed to those things. Usually in my presentations, I like to dive into the deep end with the numbers. I think numbers is another way that we as Kanaka can storytell. It helps us imagine possibilities for the futures. And I want to thank my friend Hina Keala, who helped me come to that understanding. She came to an early ho'ike of mine, and she's like, seeing that figure really helped me better see what is possible for our Hawaiian Kingdom futures in a post-occupied context. That said, we'll talk numbers, but today I'm going to try to do something different. I'm going to try to do more narrative storytelling, because up until this point, I've only shared the results of my journey. I've never actually taken people through my journey. And I don't think that's fair to others, because my journey has been long and it has been painful, and there's been a lot of cognitive dissonance along the way. And so what I hope is I can cut your time in half if you're grappling with similar conflicts. Also, I'm very nervous, and so I have a bad habit of looking over people's heads instead of making true eye contact. So if I don't make eye contact with you, can you just flag me down and like make me connect with you? I appreciate that. Okay, so the name of my story is But I Was Still a Capitalist, and I'm going to start with the point of the story, because I'm someone who likes to read a movie synopsis before I watch the movie, because I want all of my brain power to be dedicated to analyzing the movie more deeply instead of just anticipating what's going to come. I want to get to the kauna of the movie. So the point of the story, But I Was Still a Capitalist, is that even if we reject capitalism as Kanaka or other oppressed peoples or allies, or at least all the harms associated with capitalism, we may inadvertently, accidentally, unknowingly perpetuate capitalism and its harms. And that's because the United States has suppressed suppressed a proper understanding of what capitalism is. So in my case, I thought that being anti-American was the same thing as being anti-capitalist, right? But now I see that is not the case. I thought if we deoccupy the Hawaiian Kingdom, it's the same thing as decapitalizing the Hawaiian Kingdom. But now I know that that was an improper understanding on my part. And what I urge is that we increase our analysis of capitalism, that we give it a proper understanding, give it our specific mana and attention. Because I work in risk management, and often what happens is we end up focusing on symptoms of problems as opposed to root causes of problems. But we as Kānaka, we're root cause kind of people. So today, I hope that you walk away being able to determine the difference between symptoms of capitalism versus root causes of capitalism. Okay, so back to my story. In the beginning, I knew that capitalism was corrupted, but I just thought that we needed to fix it. You know, we needed to tax the rich, increase regulations, and provide things like universal health care for all. Despite all of these progressive things, you know, wanting to be in solidarity with our Native American siblings, all of that, I was still a capitalist. I fell in love with pop ed, and I was definitely anti-American. One of my favorite books is Pedagogy of the Oppressed. But despite all of this, I was still a capitalist. And I want to share that I wasn't walking around saying like, I'm a capitalist, or that wasn't a part of my identity that I embraced. But it wasn't what I was doing, it's what I wasn't doing, which was not having a proper analysis of what capitalism actually is. I became a renewable energy analyst because I thought that could be something helpful for our post-occupied Hawaiian Kingdom futures. I wanted to fully the United States from the inside out, so I became a national delegate for the Sanders campaign. That bottom photo, I know you probably can't see it, but I was at the DNC during Michelle Obama's speech. I walked out of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton's speech because I just couldn't take the neoliberalism there, but I'm sure you see familiar people, Governor Josh Green, et cetera, in these Ki'i. Despite all of these efforts, I was still a capitalist. I was reading Decolonizing the Mind when I was at Disneyland, but I was still a capitalist, and I want to share a side story about this. My good friend, she has provided a very proper critique of Hawaiian academics, saying that we're not accessible to the lahui, to the community, and I absolutely kapo'o that. And so if anything I share is unintelligible, that's my bad. I also want to share that I do not change the way I speak according to the audience, and that's because I believe every Kānaka is a high-level intellectual because our kūpuna are high-level intellectuals. I was just talking with Dr. Silva the other day, and she said when she was growing up, it wasn't cool to read and be a Hawaiian, like that wasn't considered a Hawaiian thing. But now we know that our kūpuna were total nerds, total bookworms, and so I'm just wanting to reclaim that intellectual moʻokūʻauhau. And so if I speak in this kind of way, it's because I think all of you are up there, right? So I'm trying to have reverence for all of you by speaking in that way. And I consider myself a hood Kānaka. I know we don't have real hoods in Hawaii, but for all intents and purposes, I'm a hood Kānaka, and I'm talking to the hood when I speak, and I hold the hood at that pedestal. So decolonizing the mind is one of the things that helped me realize that, because I was forced to take Ike Hawaii in college. I was ashamed of being a Kānaka when I arrived, but it's a required course, and I thank the Kānaka who made that a requirement. And this was one of the first academic books that I ever read. And I have to tell you, I did not barely understand a word in Decolonizing Mind or a sentence in Decolonizing the Mind, but I still could feel the truth that was coming from this book. It was seeping in the cracks of my trauma, and it allowed me to transform. So there's me before Decolonizing the Mind, and there's me after. And so that's why I choose to speak in this way. And I do apologize, though, if I'm ununderstandable. That's my bad. I was decolonizing feminism. I'm really big on this analysis in our mana wahine, but I was still a capitalist. I went to Palestine. I went to Greece and Rome. Like most Kānaka, I wanted to understand things all the way from the origin. I wanted to understand the root of Western Empire. Despite all of this, wanting to smash white supremacist imperialism, I was still a capitalist. So this was an important event in my life. I participated in Hawaiian Youths Abroad with Native Hawaiian Student Services at Manoa. This was a transformative, pivotal point in my life. We went to Europe to retrace the footsteps of our kūpuna who traveled there during the 19th century for diplomatic relations. And I knew little about this history, but I certainly didn't know about the progressive nature of the Hawaiian Kingdom in the 19th century with the social democracy and the welfare state. Despite this learning, though, I was still a capitalist. The following year, I went back to Scandinavia so I could study how we could return the Hawaiian Kingdom to that social democracy state in a 21st century context. So I wanted to study things such as sustainable development and worker-owned co-ops and circular economy. All of these things I thought were anti-capitalism. And at this point in my journey, I was embracing an explicitly anti-capitalist identity. And these are photos of me in anarchist-free town in Copenhagen. And my friend posted a pic of me, and in her caption, she says that I'm an anti-capitalist queen, Tina. And so I thought I was an anti-capitalist, and others around me thought I was an anti-capitalist, but I was still a capitalist. And I just want to drive this point home because capitalism is so ubiquitous and it's so elusive all at the same time. So again, I want to urge us to have a really, really rigorous kūpuna level understanding of what capital is. Okay, so when I came back, I wanted to look at how we return to the progressive nature of the Hawaiian Kingdom. And I started my research journey thanks to Native Hawaiian Student Services. And my question was, how much would it cost for us to provide for the basic needs of every single Hawaiian Kingdom citizen? So things like healthcare for all and education for all. And so I call this analysis the cost of independence today. So I want all of you to imagine that the United States packs its bags and it leaves today, and we are able to re-administer our constitution and provide these social services. How much would it cost? So the figure I got to is $14 billion per year. To put that into context, that's almost double the amount that the settler state of Hawaii collects in tax revenue each year. So this was my first existential crisis. Welcome, everyone. I was blown away by this figure. I was not expecting this figure. I thought that it was an allocation problem that we were dealing with, that the settler state was doing settler kind things with the tax revenue. And if we got control, we would just be able to allocate it appropriately to social services for our people. And in fact, I wanted to reduce the tax revenue because we know that we're getting tax revenue from exploitative tourism and militarism and all of these things. So this was a very rude awakening for me. Just a little information on how I came up with the figure. I applied the accounting principle of conservatism. So I always try to understate the figure rather than inflate the figure. So for example, I used 612,000 kānaka as my assumption. That's from Dr. Lily Kawai's dissertation, but we know we have much more kānaka than that. Also, these are based upon 2018 figures. We're in 2024 now, so the number is much bigger, but I'm not going for shock value. So I'm like, just leave it at 14 billion. It's bad enough as it is. So you can't see this graphic, but it's a really helpful one from Ōiwi. And so I was accepting that, okay, we need to increase the tax revenue to provide for our lahui. And what do we have to do? To do that, we ultimately have to increase profits because that's the source of all tax revenue. So sales tax as well as the income tax are the largest sources of tax revenue for the state of Hawaii. So in order to increase either of those things, we need to increase the sales of goods and services, right? In order to increase profits, to increase the tax revenue. So this is a basic accounting formula. Revenue minus expenses equals profit. To increase profit, we have to do one of two things. We have to increase revenue or decrease expenses. Hopefully you're doing both, right? That's when you're really good capitalists. I was realizing also that no matter what type of entity you are a part of, you could be a social enterprise, you could be a nonprofit organization, you can be a governmental organization, you can be in a ʻōiwi worker-owned co-op, and you're still subjected to the need for profit. If your revenues do not exceed your expenses, you're gone. okay, so I was accepting this, right, that we have to increase profits, but I'm like, how do we do this without replicating the unsustainability of the current system we're in? We're breaching planetary boundaries under capitalism. So that's when I started revisiting the information that I was receiving in my study abroad in Denmark. So I was looking at things such as sustainable development and green growth and worker co-ops and circular economy. And the basic idea behind sustainable development is that we are going to decouple, that's the word that's used, we're going to decouple economic growth from resource use. And just to back that up, economic growth is the same thing as gross domestic product, also known as GDP, right? And what GDP is a summation of all the revenues in an economy over a given period. So the low price you paid for the Eahou ticket, that's going to go into the GDP calculation. When you buy dinner later today, that's going to go into the GDP calculation. So all of our purchases at the end of the quarter and the end of the year, that's what's going to represent GDP. And in the economy, GDP has to grow each and every period, each and every year. And if it doesn't, we end up in a recession. So that's when people start losing their jobs and losing their homes. And we all know about the negative fallout. So going back to sustainable development, the idea was that we are going to decouple this economic growth from resource use. So we're not going to continually extract resources from the honua. And the way that we're going to achieve that is through the circular economy. So with the circular economy, or actually let's start with the linear economy. What you do is you extract resources from the honua, you make the product, you use the product, at the end of the product's life cycle, you throw it in the trash. And then you go back again and you extract the resource and make the product, so on and so forth. But what circular economy wants to do, it wants to extract the resources from the honua only one time. And then it wants to make the product with a really good design and then use the product. And at the end of the product's life cycle, you want to use the waste from this product to be the input for making the new product instead of going back to the honua to extract additional resources. So I'm like, okay, let's do this. I'm on board. So I started diving into the academic literature on this to look for case studies of where this has been done around the world. And I found, unfortunately, there's no country that has ever achieved decoupling of economic growth and resource use. And so I was like, okay, maybe it's just like we haven't done it yet, but we can do it in the future. So I was looking at the scientific literature, looking at scientists who are modeling this possibility for our futures. And so I refer to the systematic studies, which, as you know, is a study of studies. It's just a condensing of many of studies on this topic. So one of the papers is covering 800 other studies that have looked at this possibility. And the overwhelming conclusion is that it is not possible to decouple economic growth from resource use. And so this was my next existential crisis. But now I've accepted that under the second law of thermodynamics, a closed loop system will always tend toward entropy. So you can't infinitely recycle something because it'll always tend toward material degradation. I'm not a physicist. If we need more detail than that, we're going to have to phone a friend. But what I would want folks to know is that in an economic system that is dependent on infinite growth on a finite honua, that's just not mathematically possible. So again, a system that is dependent on infinite growth on a finite planet is not mathematically possible. So unfortunately, sustainable development, green growth, and circular economy is just not empirical. And I've shied away from talking about this thus far because kānaka I know, who I love and have a aloha for, and who I look up to, are working hard on circular economy. So I don't want this to be a critique of them. But I get asked about this so often that I feel accountable to start sharing. And I don't want you to listen to anything that I say, like the great George Helm says, do your homework. So go look for yourself, right, for the evidence. Okay. So I was financially modeling and I was looking at the scientific literature. Now I'm in economic theory world in my journey. And one of my professors in Denmark, he said, if you want to truly understand capitalism, you need to read Das Kapital by Karl Marx, also known as Capital. I'm so thankful that he suggested that book to me. So when I got back home to the ʻāina, I started reading it, and I have a whole presentation on this where I put Karl Marx in conversation with our kūpuna to compare and contrast a capitalist mode of production versus our ancestral economy. I can give you a link if you're interested, but I just want to quickly visit a concept of what a commodity is. So Karl Marx shares that an item produced to exchange with others in the market is a commodity. A product that is consumed by its producer is not a commodity. So if you make a leʻu today and you give it to your aloha, your ohana, that's not a commodity. But you can take that very same lei and go to the Maiden Hawaii festival and sell it. It has now become a commodity. So this is something I hope we can remember, because there's a lot of other alternative definitions of commodities, but we need to understand this to understand capitalism. So in our aloha ʻāina economy, our ancestral economy, I bring in Queen Kaʻahumanu as our spokesperson, and she says we do not have commodities or markets in our ancestral economy. Kānaka produce most of what they themselves consume. What we did not produce with our own hands was made by the hands of our relatives along our ʻāina aloha ala pūlina by name. So this is very different, because whereas in capitalism, we circulate goods and services through transactions, in our ancestral economy, we circulated goods and services through relationships, and these have very different implications. So in a transaction, when I'm purchasing my cell phone, right, it's a faceless interaction, right? So this cell phone, right, it has elements from numerous countries around the world, and numerous hands around the globe have touch this phone to produce this product, and yet I have zero relationship with any of those ʻāina, any of those hands, any of those languages and cultures, right? And that's what allows me to be complicit in the suffering of those in the global south. With our ancestral economy, it's hard to oppress people through production when that's your ohana member, your extended ohana. We have shared stories, we have shared origin, mo'olelo, and ʻāina aloha. And I think I overheard Ōiwi earlier. I really appreciated her talking about how we did like a barter-like situation for her haumana, for her ohana, I believe it was in Molokai, and that's the perfect example of our ancestral principles. So Karl Marx calls this commodity fetishization. He identified uniquely that commodities are actually what are in relationship under capitalism. So all of us who consume and produce these products, we are alienated from social relations, and that's where exploit is allowed to breed. Okay, so at this point, I realized that taxing corporations and rich, social enterprises, circular economy, nonprofit organizations, sustainable development, and Ōiwi worker co-ops were not adequate. And why? Because as long as we must buy and sell goods in the market, commodities, and be dependent on economic growth, we will always end up oppressing our lahui and our ʻāina. And so now I want to provide a cautionary note on market-based worker co-ops that I call White Workers of the World Unite. So Mondragon has been presented as like this example of how we can achieve economic ea. Mondragon is the world's largest worker-owned co-op. And in theory, if you democratize the workplace, then you're able to end all of the harm that we've been talking about. But in reality, when we study Mondragon, we see that there's one big caveat. They give ownership to all of their European workers, whereas all of their workers in the global south are not provided that privilege, even though they have all the benefits of whiteness, all the benefits of economies of scale. Because they're engaging in commodity production, they're still subjected to the competitive forces of capitalism, which causes them to make unethical decisions. Another thing that I want to provide a cautionary note on is allying with China. And I call this trading empires, because I've heard Kānaka mention that we just need to increase our exports to China and diversify our economy. And in theory, right, they're going to be altruistic and support us in our fight against the United States. But in reality, when we study the actual geopolitics of China, we see that they're engaging in the same way neo-colonialism as the United States. They're accumulating capital. They are taking advantage of weaker countries, and we should study Oceania in particular. So China is descending its police forces on Fijians at this time. China is investing $1 billion into mining in the Solomon Islands right now. There's a picture you probably can't see, but it's a horrible mining conditions in Papua New Guinea because of China. Philippines, Kenya, this Kenyan individual saying stop China invasion. And so I just want us to be very careful and very intellectually honest when we're developing strategies to combat the United States. I am with you. I'm so tired of the United States. I don't like to use the word hate, but I think that's what I feel about the United States. And I get the desire to find any alternative, but we have to remember that China is the longest enduring empire that currently exists. They've been imperial for 2,000 years, and the United States has only existed for like 400 or 500. And I'm part Chinese, and I love my Chinese kūpuna, but still, it's not okay. And I just want us to be very careful that we don't trade one oppressor for the other. Another concern, a cautionary note on internalized white savior complexes. So I feel very concerned when the oppressor tries to create false scarcity for us. And I think that some kānaka internalize this false sense of urgency, and then they try to be heroes to save us from the scarcity. So for example, I had a conversation with a kānaka who I really admire, where he was saying that, you know, we need to start social enterprises with Haole to deal with the magnitude of the risk and the urgency around climate change, because Kanaka aren't ready to do it. And that I can't agree with. And I want to caution and share this concept of chronocentricity. It's a cognitive error. It's a tendency to think that the most significant historical events are happening during our lifetime and our context, as opposed to those in prior epochs or prior contexts. So I just want to ask, are the stakes really higher for us in our lifetime compared to our kūpuna in the 19th century who experienced hundreds of thousands of kānaka death? And are the stakes really higher for us today in our relatively first world privileged existence as kānaka compared to our siblings of the global south who have been experiencing deaths by the millions for generations? I'm worried that if we don't correct our cognitive errors, what we're going to do is compromise on our values and make these concessions in a way that is not going to lead to our ʻāina economic future, even if that's our hope. Okay, so all of these things not working, I was like, okay, why don't we just put all of our weight behind deoccupying the Hawaiian Kingdom? And then when we have more political power through the deoccupation, then we'll be able to better figure out the solutions to all of these issues. But I want to share that I ultimately learned that I was having a cognitive error and that this is an incorrect assumption. There needs to be a proper order of operations. We need to become economically independent before deoccupying the Hawaiian Kingdom. And I want to thank Dr. Kiana Sai and Dr. Sai Osorio for helping me realize this. And I'm going to play clips from each of them on this mana'o.
So the question then is, how do we fix this problem without having Hawaii get thrown into economic chaos? That's the reality check. And all these things that had to be done at the university. Collector, who's a really cool brother, he's pillaging. You see how everything's get caught when this reality kicks in. Then I told him, like, New York Stock Exchange, Bank of Hawaii, Hawaiian Electric, First Hawaiian, they all listed on New York Stock Exchange because they created it as a corporation. But they didn't create it as a corporation because they're not a government. That whole thing's fraud. And all the shareholders of Bank of Hawaii all over the world bought nothing. It never really existed. This was make-believe. All the properties in Hawaii, all defective, no more title. Who's a notary? From an armed force? That's the reality check. All of a sudden, we're gonna get hit. So when you start to bring out the truth, it starts to come very close to yourself. See, when you go to the light, the truth, the light, when you go real close, guess what? You get burned. Stay back and make use of the light so you can see. Don't stick your face in the light. So the question then is, how do we fix this problem without having Hawaii get thrown into economic chaos? That's the reality check. And all these things that have to be done at the university. What we're doing up there is I'm encouraging doctoral students and master students to start coming up with plans. How are you going to fix this problem? When I first came out with my dissertation in 2008, first thing my professors wanted to know on my committee, because they couldn't break it, How do you fix the problem? See, that's the natural consequence. How do you fix the problem? And that's when it gets very complicated. It's not like we can all sit around and figure this thing out, because there are variables involved that are international and global. So we got to know how that game is played. It's almost like we got to go back into the shoes of our kūpuna, who understood the international relations and the political economy. And first thing I would say is, what would Joseph Navahi do in our situation?
Dr. John Osorio.
And we should understand that the political system of the world, and even our own politics here, is not prepared for independence today, tomorrow, next week, probably not over the next 5 years. And we should be in this for the long haul. And I know I have to end, so I have 1 minute here. We should be in this for the long haul, and we should be devoted to putting our energies together, to fighting the real enemies of this kind of lahu. It's not really just the United States. It's capital. It's multinational corporations. It's the spectacular and steady encroachment of capital on Pacific Islands everywhere. It's independent countries basically cooperating with new investments coming in from mining and land speculation and fishing rights and deep seabed mining. All of these things are things that Native people must oppose. And we must learn to do this, and we must make this the center and the focus of our fight. And independence will come. Thank you.
So, mahalo for that. I also want to note that Q&A may run into lunchtime, but come lunchtime, please feel free to leave. But if you do want to ask questions or just share mana'o, your beautiful ike, please do. Okay. So, right, I was on board with deoccupying the Hawaiian Kingdom as our top priority because I wanted to leverage international law and reparations, because in theory, under humanitarian law, the occupying country is supposed to return the occupied country to the status quo ante, or the pre-occupied situation, right? So our demographics, our property ownership layout in 1893, it's supposed to be returned. But that's the theory. In reality, when you actually study case studies of countries who have undergone deoccupation, we find that the story is more complex. So what ends up happening is that international community, which is just a euphemism for Western imperialism, they pressure these occupied countries to make concessions and to settle and to give up property ownership, and often to allow the illegal settlers to become residents or citizens. Also, in theory, like I said, the US will pay us reparations for all the damages that have been incurred during deoccupation. But when you look at the reality, the United States has never paid reparations to any country that it has occupied. It has paid economic assistance payments, right? But that always comes with strings attached. It always will be in the interest of the United States to advance their capitalists and their military objectives. So there's some payments that I've shared on the screen, but I just want to note a couple. So Japan, they paid $15 billion and they dropped nuclear bombs on Japan, and they gave them $15 billion. Vietnam, they dropped bombs on innocent children and they only paid them $1 billion. And a lot of these countries, right, they still are in economic turmoil. Japan and South Korea are the only that have become first world countries. I really suggest everyone study Dr. Noam Chomsky. He says the pretext for humanitarian intervention is always presented as an attempt to stop atrocities, but in reality, it often increases the suffering of the people it's supposed to help. And just want to take a moment to thank all of you for hanging in there, and please feel free to stand up and stretch your legs and go to the lua, what you need. So yes, on this tip of deoccupation, I wanted to re-administer, right, our Hawaiian Kingdom constitutions, because under humanitarian law, that's what the occupier is supposed to do, right? Administer the laws of the occupied country. But in reality, we see that the US interferes with democratic elections of many countries when those countries refuse to align with US military and capital objectives. And so what they end up doing is they stand up puppet governments against democracies. They essentially fund counter opposition groups. Usually it's the local elites of the area to make it seem like not only is the area destabilized, but it's destabilized because of internal conflict, when the US is the one that is pulling the strings all along, backing it all. Also, in theory, I've heard Kānaka say that we're gonna exist in like a first world living thanks to deoccupation. And by the way, I reached out to these Kanaka who I'm talking about prior to just like check in with them on what I'm sharing, and I value their kūpuna a lot. And I want them to know that I admire them tremendously, and that we disagree differently as Kanaka. We do a couple of But anyway, back to the first world living. I I just want to point out the fact that there's 150 non-white countries in the world, and only seven of them are living a standard of living equivalent to what we live as here in Hawaii at this time. And so I also want to point out that the U.S. has done over 400 interventions in its history, right? And Queen Liliuokalani's overthrow was the very first coup that the United States has done. And so we should know better as Kanaka that we're not going to be a special exception to the rule. And so I just urge us to be very honest about these things. And so for funsies, I'm sharing who I think is going to come into power if we're not economically independent prior to the deoccupation. I think it's going to be a far right-wing Kanaka or a neoliberal Kanaka. My bet is on Brenton Awa. I think the United States is going to back Brenton Awa as our mo'i. And, you know, I don't know these OHA trustees, maybe they're nice people. I want to share a story about the DNC when I was a national delegate. Governor John Waihee was also a national delegate, and we were having some interesting discussions and disagreements. And he felt the need to like flex on me and tell me that he was the governor. I'd never mentioned him being the governor. Nobody mentioned him being the governor, but he, like, in our disagreement, that's where he landed. It's like, well, I'm the former governor, and so I think that's a preview of what's to come with this puppet Hawaiian government that the U.S. is going to back. And trust me, there will be kanaka who get really rich while the rest of us continue to suffer. So yes, I wanted to support deoccupation because I thought this could be a ticket for us becoming the majority in our ʻāina again, because under international law, it's illegal for the occupying state to transfer their citizens to the occupied territory. So all the Americans that are here now, that's a violation of humanitarian law. But in reality, when you study the case studies of countries who have actually been deoccupied, they are still grappling with the settlers that came to their countries illegally. So Eastern European countries are an example. After World War II, you know, Hitler, all of that thing, they wanted to expel the Germans who illegally settled in their countries. And the international community has received this as very controversial. Also, I urge us to study the Baltic states. They were deoccupied more recently in the 90s after the Cold War, and they are receiving so much flack from the so-called international community, which is just the Imperial West, dealing with the Russians who illegally settled in their countries. So for example, Latvia, they want to reduce Russian education in their education system. But the international community is saying that this is discrimination. It's a violation of human rights law. So this is peacetime law, right? Human rights law, and then humanitarian law is the wartime law. Also, with the Ukraine war happening, Latvia has wanted to expel these Russian individuals for their national security interests, but international community is pushing back on that and not allowing that to happen. And this is just so shocking to me because these Russians actually have the opportunity to become citizens of these countries if they are to learn the language, you know, the Latvian language, etc., learn the culture, learn the life ways, and assimilate. But these Russians refuse to do that. So they're citizens to nowhere because the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, right? But somehow they're the victims, even though they're the ones who illegally settled in the country as opposed to these occupied states. So I urge us to study case studies of what has actually happened in deoccupied situations, so that way we're making decisions based off of the evidence and not just the theories. Okay, so I talked about a lot of things that aren't going to work, so I want to transition into some things that may work. And so to do this, we need to embrace Ōiwi Futures Studies. All of you are futurists, our kūpuna are futurists, we have their DNA. And what I want us to do is de-imperialize our sense of time and be able to open up to long time horizons, our ability to vision out into the far futures. I'm doing an article on this where I compile Mana'o 30 Kānaka on Ōiwi Futures Studies. And I want to share Mana'o from Dr. Kaʻahumanu. He says that we are operating on genealogical time. We protect our sacred places. We protect our language. These are things that can't be measured in days or even years. These things take generations and epochs and eras. So if we are able to, if we're not able to open up our sense of time and de-imperialize our sense of time, what we'll inevitably do is perpetuate the status quo or the present, right? So we'll start from the present, and then we'll walk our way forward into the future, perpetuating status quo. This is forecasting. But what we want to do is we want to build a vision for our desired, preferred ʻāina economic system together and have that be our starting point. And then we reverse engineer, we walk backwards to the present so we can adjust our assumptions, our thoughts, our behaviors, our habits to align with our preferred features. That is called backcasting as opposed to forecasting. So where do we get our ideas for this preferred desired future out there? What I want to say is that another important theory in Ōiwi Futures Studies, as you know, is the futures are in the past. And so thus far, we've been looking at a lot of Western ideas of what could lead to the ending of the suffering for people in our ʻāina. We've looked at circular economy, worker co-ops, international law, all of these kind of Maiʻa, and it hasn't been working. So I want to say that we should listen to our kūpuna, because our kūpuna are the only people who have ever created a regenerative, sustainable economic system that isn't based on the domination ethic. And so this is my imperfect definition of our ancestral economy. It is a purely and science-based system of production that ensures the well-being of the ecosystem over thousands of years. And so this science-basedness is important. I got this from Pamela Enos and other Kānaka who have shared that our people, our kūpuna had no choice but to be fact-based. When you live in Hawaii, an island environment, a remote environment, you can't BS for too long, right? There's a small margin of error that's allowed before the consequences of your BS are being felt rapidly and acutely. And so that is what instilled this ability to create a science-based economy. So the elite were not able to just endlessly exploit Kānaka labor and ʻāina, right? Because there would be adverse consequences felt very quickly in an island environment. And so I think you've been hearing, I'm just urging us to always be like our kūpuna and be very empirical and be very kilo and base our decisions off of the facts. This is a Hawaiian Kingdom Futures Funnel to kind of summarize this idea of Ōiwi Futures Studies. So the plane at the bottom is representing time. So on the left-hand side is the present. The further out we go to the right is the futures. Let's pretend we're studying 200 years from now. These white circles are representing different scenarios for the future. So let's make our preferred future one of those plausible futures, right? We want to end commodity production. We want to end our dependence on economic growth. We don't want to prioritize Western imported conjecture. We want to listen to the people who actually got the job done, which is our kūpuna. We also want to be honest about the fact that capitalism is probably a likely scenario, capital accumulation. I know a lot of people like to talk about late stage capitalism and like feel like it's inevitable that it's going to just diminish itself because of how bad things are. But again, I would say that's chronocentricity, cognitive error, where you think that things happening in your lifetime are that much worse compared to other lifetimes. And capital accumulation has been happening for thousands of years. And so it's very adaptable, it's very pervasive. And capitalism is actually only the recent iteration of capital accumulation. So chattel slavery that our Black siblings in the US were subjected to, that's actually not capitalism. I'm not going to share the details as to why, because we don't have time. We can talk about that later. But nevertheless, just want to drive the point home that it's not inevitable that capitalism goes away. We have to be very deliberate in developing strategies against it. So back to identity, being a capitalist-fluent, anti-capitalist. Whereas I'm very firm on our values for a preferred future, I'm a lot more flexible when we're talking about the transition plan. So I absolutely think we should use stock investing, real estate investing, other modalities to get us from the present to our preferred futures. Here's an example of that. I think we need to expand the Ōiwi trust. We can't historicize the Ōiwi trust, rest on our kupuna's laurels. So if we are middle class kānaka and above, we have a kuleana to leave our wealth to the wāhui at the end of our lives in a community trust where the beneficiaries of this trust are those with Native Hawaiian ancestry. And so I put together a proposal for a Native Hawaiian housing trust. And I modeled out in 25 years, if 1,000 ohana left their properties in this community trust for our wāhui at the end of their lives, every year for 25 years, what would be the result? So I found that Native Hawaiian houselessness would be gone in 4 years. We would be able to provide housing for kānaka at half the market rental rate of rent currently. And therefore, we would be able to prevent 26,000 ohana from being lost to the diaspora. And we would increase our proportion of the population. So right now, we're like roughly 20%-ish. But we could, through this proposal, we could become 25% of the population. And all of my proposals are centered around correcting the diaspora because I believe we become politically powerful when we become the majority again. So yeah, how have I reconciled finance and Ike Hawaii? I have to thank Dr. Kamana Beamer and Mako Kamana. That book changed my life. Selective appropriation is a concept he put forward. He shows that we can access Western tools, but we just cannot assimilate to Western ideology. I hope you see the difference, Western tools versus Western ideology. And so in his book, he talks about our ali'i in the 19th century. People think that they were participating with Western institutions because they were being colonized. And he says, no, they were selectively appropriating these institutions for their own needs to benefit our nation's interests. Also, I want us to reclaim that agency that he expresses here today and know that we can engage with Western methods, but still be loyal to Ōiwi methodology. So methods versus methodology. So I'm loyal to the soil, my values, my heart, all of my being are always going to be committed to our Ōiwi worldviews. But I'm willing to compete and use the market to advantage our people to get to our desired futures. So going back to the futures funnel, if any of you are engaging in nonprofits or circular economy worker co-ops, know I'm with you and I mahalo you for all of that important work that you're doing. All that I ask is that we increase our accountability as we go further out into the future. So as an example, today, I think all of us should make a concerted effort to support any and all Native Hawaiian-owned business, even if they're not paying their workers a living wage, even if they're using horrible plastics and other inputs in their products. Support them indiscriminately. But if you're a Native Hawaiian business owner and you're making a profit, I'm going to ask, at what point are you going to convert into a worker co-op? And when are you going to start making your supply chain more circular? So I would ask that we have plans that we put forward to make sure we transition that way. And then if we are worker co-ops and we are as circular as is possible under capitalism, then what is your strategic plan to get us to our preferred futures where we're abolishing commodity production and dependence on economic growth? And so I want to shout out my Hoʻolauna Billy Kinney, who's actually developing these kind of plans for the entities that he's involved with. So we're forced to make these individual decisions under capitalism, but let's always keep the collective in mind. So yes, use these things as a means, but let's always be accountable to the ends, which is our preferred futures for our wāhui to end that suffering. So thank you for participating in a lot of content that I hope will become an Ōiwi economics degree program at the University of Hawaii. And that's because we don't have a lot of kānaka who have aloha ʻāina consciousness, who also have high levels of skill in economics. So we need to grow our OPO in this way. I want to leave you with this today. This is me trying to look to our kūpuna for answers. And that's what I'm doing this semester. I'm studying the Hawaiian language New Pepa to understand our economic theories to build out our desired futures. But this is a moʻolelo. Queen Kaʻahumanu, she did a heroic act in the 19th century when the United States military was coming to our shores for the very first time. And they were coming because they wanted to collect debt on behalf of the American merchants because our li'i had gotten into a lot of debt with them. So they were threatening force. And what she did is she consolidated the debt of the li'i and she nationalized it. She made it sovereign debt. And then she put out a proclamation calling on all ʻāina to provide sandalwood or the equivalent of 4 Spanish dollars in order to protect our Hawaiian kingdom from this threat of force. So I was really inspired by this. And so earlier we looked at the cost of independence today, which was that $14 billion. And so I was like, what about the cost of independence tomorrow? What if we looked at how much time it would require from each of us to provide for the basic needs of our people, healthcare, education, etc., for all? What would it take? So here's the number I got. Each of us would have to contribute 31 days per year in order to make sure the basic needs for all of our kānaka are cared for. And even if I'm 5 times wrong, even if the figure is 160 days, I'm willing to give that labor. And I think so many of us are willing to give that labor to make sure that our people are cared for. And so this was the first time in my journey where I felt hope. And I realized that hope because I relied on the wisdom of our kūpuna instead of, circular economy, sustainable development, international law, all of the things, right? I finally came to a place of optimism by yielding to our kūpuna. Next time, we're going to talk about how the Hawaiian Kingdom becomes the real world Wakanda. But mahalo nui for hanging in there. I know that was a lot. I would love to hear anyone out there that all of you have the topic, because we need to create that degree program collectively. And I know you guys have a lot of beautiful ike to make that a reality. So, mahalo nui. Anyone have any ideas? How do I give this mic?
Thank you very much. What a comprehensive.
That's a nice way to put it.
Thank you very much for your comprehensive presentation. I have one thing.
Want to come over here?
There we go. Just a little bit. Malka is the girls' industrial school was up here, and there's pretty comprehensive explanations. Largely girls that were truants or out after curfew, or maybe their families skipped them out. I don't know. So, but they were very industrious in what they chose to show. Hollow weaving and mattress making and all kinds of things. But my question is this: the military owns about 1/4 of all of the Hawaii land. And yes, they've been giving back little bits and pieces and everything. But what concerted effort did you see in your economic plan to lawfully, I'll have to do it through the lawful means, to have the military divest themselves of the land and then use the land for the productive means that you would encourage? You don't have to answer that. Just
Mahalo. Comprehensive is a very kind way of putting my presentation. It was very long, and sorry about that, everyone. But mahalo for your Nino. I am not an expert on militarism by any means. I'm sure there's others who have wonderful strategies in how to pressure and agitate the military. Like Hui Aloha Aina o Honolulu, please join them. They would have a lot of information on that. And I love them. But I guess what I'm trying to share here is a market-based strategy where we try to acquire property through the market. Like I said, like all of us leaving our lands via the lahui and perpetuity via trust. And I don't mean these strategies to challenge or counteract other strategies, such as the demill strategies. I think what's nice about using the market is it can be parallel to those other militarized strategies. So I just think the more that we're economically sufficient, and like I said, I have 30 cousins on my father's side who are mostly suffering still with the intergenerational trauma, right? I think only 4 of us have college education. And so it's not lost on me how lucky I am to be here with all of you today, when in my own ohana and so much of the lahi were reeling from the intergenerational historical personal trauma. So I just want to put forward ideas of how we handle that, care for the basic needs of our people so they can begin to heal from trauma. And then we can counteract the military even more powerfully when we care for our people in that way. Do we have any additional? Okay. No.
Aloha, my name is Jackie, and I teach about oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. My name is Jackie, and I teach economics at Decolonial Community College. And I just want to really for that because as a Western trained academic in the field, I've struggled to find resources to communicate even a portion of that to my students. I'm facing challenges pedagogically in institution, part of the wage system, to integrate that into my classes and to spend more than 5 minutes talking about comparative economic systems and why capitalism is just like undeniably organized, the model, the best, and the most efficient, like for no one. But I'm not quite sure. I partly asked, like, I would love for you to come speak to my students. Because as a mathemata, I do have a lot of time to I'm from here, I'm from here, and I have a lot of the people that helps influence your work. I look to their work as well as my inspiration. But it's not. I don't think all of that should come from me. I would love to have you come speak and be a resource, but also offer whatever I could to help your plan and make that what you're trying to do. I don't think anyone's done anything like you have in such detail and such. You looked at everything from the political system to the economic system to trying to find that mix of, like you said, using the tools but staying true to the ideology, using the methods but following the methodology and believe. I 10 years of looking for a resource and we're right there. So
Wow, thank you so much. Absolutely, I will come and share anything that you believe will be helpful to your haumana. And I'm available for speaking for anyone. I don't charge for my speaking. This is the one way that I get to give back to the lahi, just a small portion of all that all of you have given to me, our kūpuna, etc. Sometimes people have to spend down a grant and then I'll accept the payment because they just have to get rid of the money. But yeah, this is the way that I give back, and yes, I want to be helpful in any way that I can, and I just admire you for being an economist who has that analysis, because what she's mentioning is at the college they only teach one type of economics, which is neoclassical or Keynesian economics, right? Any alternative system isn't welcome. I began to learn about alternatives. I had to go to Europe to get there, right? I had to go to Denmark to get any small alternative, but it's not welcomed in the University of Hawaii and American universities for the most part. So thank you so much for seeing me. Like I said, we're unicorns, right? Kānaka who have high levels of ʻāina consciousness, who also are skilled in economics. We just don't exist. We're unicorns. So you have to deal with me. I don't even have a master's degree. Hopefully in a few years, our OPO are going to rise up and they're going to have doctorates who are going to be a lot better at communicating these type of things. So, mahalo nui, Jackie, I think you said it.
Hello, mahalo for your presentation. My name is Jordan, and I just first want to just thank you for just delivering all of this knowledge to us. And one of the things that was really striking is how you brought back that 14 billion, kind of like initially really depressing like figure into something that feels really doable. It's 31 days per year of like service. And I used to work in environmental education here, and then I was really struggling with this problem of like, how do you convince students who are wanting to go into this field, like aloha ʻāina work, and just reasonably and accurately sort of deliver the information of this to be something that will, allow them to pay it. And I was like not really able to do that. And I recently got laid off, so it was like a really difficult problem. Like I can't demonstrate with my life or any of my studies that this is available. But I was thinking about what you're able to do in just 1 hour of with like, and it's like the value, I guess, like within that 1 hour is like so much more than what is ever offered in any job for 1 hour. So I was wondering if you had researched anything in like the concept of time banking or something similar to where just the time that somebody puts into some kind of really culturally valuable work that is maybe valued by Western labor structures, if that has been studied and implemented in any case, and what is the likelihood of something like that being implemented or tested in Hawaii? And also, one last thing is, do you have the link to that talk that you gave about Marx and like dialogue? I'd be super interested.
Yes, thank you for hanging in there for an hour plus. I hope I saved you 5 years of your life, though, of existential crises and other conflicts. I have not studied time thinking. I'm not even familiar with that term, but it sounds really interesting and would love to just talk about it. I'm not an expert on that or anything of the sort. I know there's economists who are trying to like value and account for things such as like female labor, right? Because we're the ones who tend to take care of the pay and the kūpuna, and we need to start valuing this labor that is kind of invisibilized by the economy. So I'm thinking feminist economics might be a place that we could look toward to kind of get into that. Sounds like you have a lot of great ideas about it already. And yes, I'll share the presentation with you. Mahalo.
Hi, I'm Carolyn, and I'm mind blown, first of all, and super grateful because that was a pretty vulnerable or transparent and super honest presentation. And I really applaud you for that. It can be very unpopular to have to kind of de-romanticize some theories. My brother and I, we kind of go toe to toe all the time on topics like this. I don't have an economic background. I could never even begin to have like that kind of a conversation, but I'm an agricultural background, and agricultural economics are kind of simple, and the whole aloha ʻāina type of visual and especially ahupua'a ideas of economics really make sense to me. And I hope to start the Lahaina community land trust. I really want to talk story with you. I have so much questions and things that I want to talk sorry about, but I'm really invigorated and so stoked for what you shared, because we don't have time to waste on things that won't lead to solutions. But if we can learn from the experiences of others, that's wisdom. Yeah, when we can learn from the experiences of others and take that ike and figure out how it applies to our situation. That's
that's a strategy I think that's going to profit us the most as far as getting to the type of future that many of us want to see. So also just want to comment and give so much appreciation and kudos to you, but that's brave. And I really, really respect your courage to do that and to commit your life to bringing light and truth based on everything that we can know from other experiences and other actual case studies. You know, it's important to be very realistic about the nature of our circumstances and the nature of what we're up against. What we're learning in Lahaina is getting people to think differently about wealth, about land as a wealth building vehicle, about the commodification of land is a really steep uphill battle. And it's a difficult thing to talk about. Not everybody's ready for it, but it's something we have to talk about more and more. And especially the idea of how do we put our values into action in the way we're living. And it starts in small ways, but hopefully it eventually goes to the big ones that are really the moments that really have to change. So thank you. And I would love to take you to lunch or something. You gotta talk. Thank you.
Mahalo. I just admire you first and foremost. Thank you for caring for our mom. And I can't imagine what it's like actually implement the trust as opposed to just like throwing ideas and imagining about it. But in any way I can be helpful, please I would love to do that. Aloha. My name is Kelly, and I work for the health center, but I kind of have a stronger identity as one as being a recovering academic. I've been an academic for a while, and we get to hate because I think, you know, on so many levels we aren't learning what we should be learning in school, but that's kind of solidified in the university. I really resonate with what Jackie was saying about economics. Where I learned the most was when I spent all of my conference money when I was working as an academic. Went to the World Social Forum in the southern region of Brazil, much to the university. I was working for much to their dismay. And the World Social Forum was a deliberate reaction at the same time to the World Economic Forum, bringing together activists, civil society, and nonprofits. I mean, full kind of spectrum as being a little bit critical of capitalism to be holistically critical of capitalism. And there were, I mean, to me, this festival is actually a kind of mini social forum because it's a space where you can, you know, just like what you really did, talk about really different alternatives and other ways of thinking that we don't get in formal educational spaces. So I want to thank you for that. And I also want to recognize that similar to you, I also was exposed as a, you know, I'm Kānaka, I'm American. I was exposed to a lot of this thinking in Europe, actually, also. And non-American writers, thinkers, activists. Time banking in the UK is prominent through movements like the transition tone movement. And there's a lot of, for me, it's also connecting with other movements that are very active, very inspiring, and you don't have to dig that deep to actually form. And so I wanted to say something like that. And then my other thing I wanted to say is I think it's really important we need to reclaim the word economy because the original meaning is just to manage the household. It has nothing to do with money. And so for me, when you say circular economy, I'm actually thinking more of the ʻāina economic way of circulating and distributing, not just the extractivist economy way of thinking. So I think there's something really powerful in taking some of this English language and reclaiming it in a way that even the root of that is something else that's been completely commodified and and oppressively taken over for all of us. So thanks a lot. Mahalo. It is so true. So if you are Pololi, please head out, but I'll respond and take any other questions. And if you want to just talk story, not in front of everyone, I'll also be around for that. Yes, thank you for that. I also want to keep urging that I do want us to prioritize our kūpuna's over like the European or the other ideas that are out there. And if we're gonna build solidarity, I would prefer, don't make my mistake and build solidarity with Europe. I would build solidarity with like the Zapatistas in Mexico, or some South American Hora, or yeah, these people of the global South is who I want to ally with in that way. But nevertheless, thank you. Yes, we do need to reclaim a lot of these words.
Check, are there any more questions? This is an awesome conversation. Anyone want to put your hand up? How many more questions do we have? Let's get that one.
Hello, my name is Kimala. I just really wanted to mahalo you so much for connecting the dots for us. I think you brought in your social part of trauma. And I think that oftentimes when we have a conversation about economics, we forget the trauma piece, which is people's ability to move forward. And I just really wanted to really honored that you brought that into this conversation, because I think it's I think most of us who live here are fighting this economic system for survival, in addition to the generational trauma that our people are navigating. And so I just wanted to again follow that, and I think every time I've studied economics, you know, you look at capitalist systems and you say it's basically in a vacuum without oppressive. They take oppressive out completely out of the conversation. And so the fact that you're bringing it back in is critical to this, and I really appreciate to mark that, because it's great. Because you're serving the most beautiful.
Very generous, very designing. Yes, the intergenerational trauma, the historical trauma. I want to be someone who again normalizes those conversations. Did I share that? My kūpuna, my great grandfather, he was a pagan. Did I say that earlier? He was a pagan, and he was refusing to convert to Christianity, right? And so that's why we think he was targeted and falsely accused of having leprosy, right? It was going against the Hawaii's expectations. And so I am where I'm at today because I want to be vulnerable. If I wasn't vulnerable, I was like very disembodied like this 2 years ago, and I had difficulty opening up about emotions, you know, and I would just be angry. That was my only emotion that I had to me was anger, right? And so I think all of you people in the last week, kūpuna, who have allowed me to heal from my PTSD, right? And just imagine if we support so many other people, right, what the potential is. So I come to you as a survivor. I have a lot of survivors yet, so my mission is to make sure that I'm not the only one. I'm not 4 out of 30 cousins in my Ōiwi who can receiving needs to open up to all. And I'm from the West Side, so I'm always down for white and Wakakiro, the beach, all of those kind of keiki who are feeling the brunt of capitalist brutality and history.
But yeah, what I want to say is whether or not she knows it, you know, the work that she's done is definitely a pillar of the inspiration that brought Eahou together. You know, having these types of conversations, bringing our lahui together, you know, having individuals coming up and challenging ways of thinking and doing it from, you know, such a deep-rooted way of honoring where it's going to come from. You know, always deep honor to have you share this day with us today. And, you know, we just want to continue to inspire these conversations to occur. You know, I'm honored by the folks that are in this room doing such important work for our lahui. We don't always get time to come together and have these conversations. And sometimes it's
at a front line, right? Sometimes it's at a holiday. But these are the conversations we should be having as often as possible. So that's all we're trying to start here. Getting more of us coming together, maybe critiquing the way that we're doing things, but doing it from a way that we know we need to continue to shift and rebuild and grow. But yeah, I think we're gonna, so mahalo again too. Yes, we're gonna transition to lunch right now. And yeah, the programming over the course of the afternoon is gonna continue to be between here and Palau Nana. This afternoon, we're gonna have another Palau Ohia workshop here on the act of writing Ka'au, Haku, how do we continue to manifest the future that we want, rooted in our old stories and LAs and kūpuna. There's going to be a talk on the economy, and specifically those that are Native Hawaiian business owners from across our ʻāina, from moʻokūʻauhau, from Molokai, from Oahu as well, and just talking about their journeys as entrepreneurs living within the systems we have today, and then a conversation on health and wellness as well. And then as we transition into the evening, there's going to be a really awesome night market over at the Japanese Cultural Center that's going to have a lot of our